So good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to say hello and good morning to all of you again. It's another edition of our broadcast series on the corona situation in Europe, this time with Antoni Napojalski, who is also working with us at the department and who is Polish. Antoni, it's good to have you here. How are you?
Hi. I'm so excited to be on this today. My name is Antoni. I work with Nikolaus at the department for quite some time now. And currently I'm in Warsaw in Poland, so I think I will have a chance to tell you a bit about what's happening here.
Yes, how is the day-to-day life in Warsaw at the moment, and how is it in the rest of the country?
Well, it's weird. I can say this. Definitely, the freedom of movement is very strictly limited, starting from the borders, which are actually closed at the moment by both Poland and the neighboring countries. All the international railway connections and airline connections are closed, up to limitations like there are only certain reasons why you can leave the house, and there are only 3 or 4 of them. If you leave the house, you need to do it in a very specific way. You need to keep distance. You need to be in a very small group of only 2 people maximally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now the image is frozen, which is a pity. So, Antoni, are you back?
Yeah,
I'm back. Okay, are you back? Okay, so then there was an internet. I assume that there was an internet problem.
Yeah.
Let me just check whether it's, and I think it was on your side because everything here continued to work, which is better than on my side. Yes, this looks good. You're still okay. It works. Okay. So we are back to normal. Okay. So there's an internet problem in Warsaw. Okay.
Absolutely, as you can see.
Yeah. But apart from this, you said that life is a little bit weird because people are not allowed to leave. There are only 3 or 4 reasons why people are allowed to leave. Correct? That was when we were interrupted. Okay.
Yes,
so what are the reasons what are the reasons to leave the house?
Well, the first one is that you can only leave for work or work-related reasons. So, if there are people who cannot work from home, they can go to work, of course. You can also leave house for those so-called necessities of daily life, which is the biggest controversy here, because no one exactly knows what the necessities of a daily life are, and in the end, it is a very I would say also a dangerous thing, because in the end it all goes down to the policeman deciding what is and what is not a necessity of your daily life. The most common understanding of this would be, for example, grocery shopping or going to the doctor if you need to do so. But there is a big controversy about whether you're allowed to go jogging, or if you're allowed to go for a walk, also, for a health reason, or I don't know, mental health reason, for example.
So you personally, do you do this at the moment, or do you prefer staying at home? You don't, because you don't want to take the risk, right? Okay. No, the risk to be prosecuted, or the risk.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because there are also 2 other reasons, and they're not really applicable at the moment. So one is volunteering in a fight against the disease, and the last one is participating in religious activities. So for the moment, I don't really leave the house very often. As also the fines are ridiculously high. They amount up to, in euros, will be like 5,000 or 6,000 euros. And they're, sorry, please go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and they're issued as administrative decisions, which is another interesting thing, by the public health authority.
So that was exactly the question I wanted to ask. So the legal basis of this is it's not a law, it's some kind of
Well, it is based on a law, but many people, including, for example, the Polish Ombudsman for Human Rights, have said that the legal basis is wrong. It's not the one that's supposed to be, because at the moment it's all based on some sort of anti-infectious diseases law that should not serve as a legal basis for limiting the purpose of leaving a house. It can only limit the way people travel or commute, So for example, the rules that they should keep a 2-meter distance, or that every other seat on a public bus should be left empty, that's fine. But this piece of legislation cannot serve as a legal basis of, telling people that they cannot go jogging or that they cannot go for a walk.
And do people still go jogging, or is everyone like you, that everyone tries to be careful and doesn't do anything outside?
Well, I don't know obviously what the numbers are exactly, but we hear about cases of people being fined for taking a bike ride in the city without any specific purpose, with fines up to 2,000 euros. So there are certainly people who are trying to do this. And there are also, of course, people who say that, those instruments lack a proper legal basis, and the fines should be challenged in courts. And
yeah, and is there any case already, or is it just people thinking about it?
No, there are people thinking about it, because another tricky part is that most of the courts are not really operating at the moment.
Yeah, indeed quite similar to many other countries at the moment, I assume.
And
that
also, if you would like to challenge something in court, it's not really comfortable to go to a court at the moment, right?
At the moment, yeah. And do you, in your personal assessment, do you think that people support the measures, or is it something? For example, the issue that you don't know exactly whether you are allowed or not to, or not allowed to leave the house for sports activities. Is this something where people want clearer rules, or is it something where they take it as it is at the moment?
Certainly people understand the gravity of the situation, and they understand that measures need to be introduced, and also very strict limitations need to be introduced. But I don't think that many people would agree that those unclear gray area kind of rules are the perfect solution here.
Yeah.
And especially in the legal community, there are more and more voices every day challenging the way that the whole architecture of this fight against COVID is built here.
And the architecture is built mainly on measures taken by the government, you say? It's not the parliament, it's mainly the government acting.
It's mainly the government, but the biggest accusation coming from both the opposition and the legal community is that no state of exception was introduced here. That in theory will still in normal times, and it's all, normal kind of legislation operating.
Yeah, so this state of exception is an emergency state that is written in the constitution for catastrophic events, I would assume.
Yeah, we have 3 types of emergency states in our constitution. One is for war, one is for natural disasters, and one is very broad and could basically be applied to different types of emergency situations. And at least 2 of those, either the natural disaster or the broad one, could apply at the moment.
Okay, and the consequence of applying them would be that?
One consequence is then there is a clear legal basis for limiting rights and freedoms of the citizens, but also a clear method of doing this. The other consequence, which is probably the main reason why they're not introduced, is that it will be impossible to hold elections during a state of emergency. And we had planned presidential elections for the 10th of May, with polls suggesting that the current president would probably win again. So there is, a political game behind this as well.
But wouldn't it be possible to revoke the state of emergency then early, somewhere in May, before the election?
There is a constitutional term, I think it's up to 90 days after the state of emergency, that blocks any election from happening.
Okay, so that means if the state of emergency is declared, then no elections in May.
Exactly.
And the acting president might have an interest that the elections stay in May and are not postponed.
Yes. So right now the situation, the whole election situation is quite complicated, because there were many ideas, including changing constitution ad hoc just to somehow manage the situation. But the current solution is that we are going to have post elections. We're going to vote by mail somewhere in the midst of May. just to keep the just not to change the election date.
So the idea is then not to go physically into a public building or something, but to do it from home?
Yeah, I mean, from home and not from home, because as in Poland, there's not very much of a tradition of voting per mail. We don't really have the infrastructure ready. Everything is now improvised, so to say. And the way it's supposed to work is that every person will receive like a voting set in their mailbox, however, with no identification of identity verification. And then they will have to fill it out and bring it to a voting box somewhere in the city, which then again will lead to gatherings of people in a way, because there are not so many of those boxes planned to be distributed among the towns.
So this sounds very weird because, as you certainly know, all kinds of such elections produce all kinds of constitutional problems, obviously.
Of course.
And introducing something like this in a situation like we have it at the moment is not something I would advise any government to try.
Yeah.
So why is this? What would be the consequence if the elections were simply not happening because of the disaster? Then probably the government would stay in place, right?
The thing is, this is a presidential election, not parliamentary election.
Yes.
So it doesn't affect the government.
So, sorry, the president stays in power then?
Well, it could only happen postponing of the election and extending the term of the president if a state of emergency was introduced. But the fear on the side of the ruling party is that if the term will be extended even a couple months, Poland already will be hit by recession and economic crisis. And this will probably turn the polls, not to mention that probably the crisis will prove that the healthcare system is not very functional at the moment in the country, which will again make the candidate lose some support in the elections.
Okay, so this is probably your interpretation of the motives why the president wants the election now, but it's probably not the official explanation, right? So what is the official explanation then?
The official is that number one, we don't need a state of emergency. Number two is if state of emergency was introduced, this would lead to significant liability issues on the side of the state, and we can't afford this as a country. Which again is questionable if liability will be so huge, which I don't think, but again, it's my opinion personal. But those are the official arguments that we hear.
But I mean, and therefore, then third argument, and therefore it's necessary to completely change the voting system?
Yes, exactly.
Because the catastrophe, which is not a catastrophe, hinders us from doing the elections in the way we normally do elections.
I mean, this is a very sophisticated logical exercise, which I think would be a lovely example for first-year law students in the logic class. But this is exactly what we hear in the last weeks.
And I mean, if this is now really done in the way that people get something sent home, no identification is taken, and then they bring it into somewhere where the letters are collected, I think there won't be, I mean, it's quite evident that there is a serious risk that the Constitutional Court will declare this unconstitutional if it were a democracy with standards I'm used to at least.
I think the last part is crucial of the standards that you're used to, because the Constitutional Court at the moment is controlled by the ruling party as well, by judges appointed by them directly. And there is, I mean, this is again a political assessment, but there is no chance they would challenge those elections.
So in your view, at least, the most probable outcome of all this is that there will be an election in early May without state of emergency, that the president will be re-elected on this new system, via this new system, and that somebody might challenge this, but it will not be successful.
Yes, exactly. I mean, one of the possibilities is that the European Union would intervene. But this is, a big question mark. What will their reaction be? to this.
Yeah. Is there any statement from the Commission already on this change of the electoral system? Is there anything you are aware of?
Not that
No.
I'm aware of, no.
Is there any other statement of any
There is
European
one,
member state? Yeah.
There is one from OECD, very like in an alarming tone, that those elections will probably not fit the requirements of elections in a democratic country governed by the rule of law. But so far as I know, that's the only one.
And wouldn't it be possible to simply postpone the election, I mean, legally speaking now, without declaring the state of emergency?
No, you can't do that without changing the constitution.
And the government doesn't have the majority that is needed for changing the constitution.
Yeah, because you need 2/3 in the lower house of the parliament, which they don't have. So this would require the opposition to vote in as well. And the opposition is not very interested in it because they don't really know what exactly will be the outcome of, so to say, opening the constitution and changing something in it.
So what is the standpoint of the opposition then at the moment? What are they trying?
I would like to know as well. I mean, their standing is quite unclear at the moment. I think they're pushing obviously against those elections, but they do not have a united front. So the candidate of the biggest opposition party withdrawn from the election race, and she said that she's boycotting those elections completely. But then again, other candidates didn't do so, and they're still running. So this is quite a mess, I must say. Although it cannot be excluded that also after the elections, there will be political voices saying that, those were not really elections in the way that we were used to, and they will be questioning the outcome. I mean, one more thing that we haven't mentioned yet. I mean, it is also possible that another new scenario will be introduced, a new solution will be introduced if the infection rates will increase in the next weeks, which is also expected here quite rapidly.
So Poland is behind Austria when it comes to the wave, right? So okay. Yes. So how many infected and how many dead?
I think right now it's almost 6,000 infected and less than 200 dead.
Okay.
But
so this is almost a month behind Austria.
I mean, the problem is that there is a very small rate, the testing rate. There are not so many tests done as in other countries. I think in total there are still less than 100,000 tests done from the beginning. So it's hard to have a clear picture of what is actually happening at the moment.
So, but if the disease should develop in a way that is similar to many of the other countries, then the situation will be more serious in a month or so. And which impact could that have on the election then? I mean, would that change anything? I mean, then probably they would simply, I mean, if your assumptions are true, then they would probably simply ask to send the votes by mail instead of bringing them somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, one other option is that there was also something introduced in the latest amendment of the electoral law, that the chairman of the parliament has now freedom to move the election dates a couple of weeks in each direction. So they can postpone it to a week or two, they can do it earlier a week or two. So this might also happen, that this will be just postponed a couple of weeks to, not to do this in the peak of the epidemic, just a couple of weeks after.
And the president of the parliament is from the same party like the president, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So this is very peculiar, and I can imagine that also for many of our viewers, this is something really hard to comprehend. This whole situation, but unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with now.
And still, although all this is so complicated, the assumption that it will be beneficial for the acting president to keep the date is true.
It is true, and the polls confirm that right now he has quite high support, the highest among the candidates in the presidential race, and also there was a poll on public trust to certain politicians, which he won as well. So at least as it stands now, he was not hit, politically speaking, by the whole epidemic.
Mhm. And the coming back to the opposition, so if do you see any options, so political or legal options to change anything, or is this just a train that will not stop?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, the most logical solution would be state of emergency, which was introduced, as you know, in many European countries already. And there are absolutely all reasons to do so.
But it's only the president being allowed to decide on this, or who, or is it the parliament, or
the government?
The government.
The government.
The government, without any control in the parliament. So it's up to the government.
Yeah.
Okay, so that, I mean, but that's probably then not really a realistic option.
No,
for the
that's the
opposition.
thing. This is not a realistic option. The realistic options, what are they? I don't know, honestly. I don't want, talk some
Speculation.
speculation at the minute, because I think no one really knows now what to do with this whole conundrum.
Wow. Okay. So then, I mean, one of the reasons that you mentioned before why all this is happening is the economical situation that might get much worse in the near future, because probably similar to Vienna, the shops are closed, universities, public buildings are closed.
Exactly.
So the day-to-day life is quite similar then, right? It's comparable.
Yeah. I mean, the measures that are experienced in daily life are very much similar.
Yeah. Is public transport still running?
It is. It is running. It is running, but I think on a, not on the normal rate as it was before.
What about the situation of the media at the moment? Is there any? I mean, how is there any opposition coming from the fourth power, meaning that there are sufficient amounts of independent media writing about this, or is it like in Hungary that there is no independent media anymore?
No, the media market is significantly better than in Hungary here. There are the few, and not just a few, but a couple of independent newspapers or online media who are reporting on this. There are also television broadcasting stations who are also independent from the government, as well as the radio. So this is not as a problem as it is in Hungary. And of course, they're very critical of what's happening in Poland at the moment.
Yeah, and is it also the public broadcaster being independent, or I mean, do people read and watch this, or is it?
I mean, the public broadcaster is completely controlled by the government.
So, okay.
Those are private broadcasters.
And the private broadcasters are, I mean, probably as everywhere in Europe at the moment, in a rather difficult economic situation, because the markets crash, and for TV broadcasting agencies as well as for journals and newspapers. So probably this is not getting better, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes further. I mean, it's especially hard for newspapers who can't be distributed in a normal way.
Yeah.
And not many of them has switched to the online model before. There was only one major newspaper with a huge amount of online subscribers. So we'll see how it goes. One of the major weekly magazines has already closed their printed edition 2 weeks ago. So this might be also an outcome of this whole situation.
Wow. Pooh. Hard to ask an additional question because it's it's impressive, I would call it. I mean, but perhaps let's switch the topic and go to something which we had a rather intense communication about in the last days, which is about the surveillance undertaken to keep these measures under control, or keep people under control, that they follow those measures. Poland is also quite specific in this area, correct?
Yes, so it started, I think it was the 19th of March when a smartphone app called Home Quarantine was introduced. And then it was a voluntary measure. So every person who was quarantined, and those will people who were either in contact with infected people or coming from abroad had to undergo a 14-day quarantine. And then the procedure was that the police was responsible for checking up on them if they're really at home or if they need something, and so on and so forth. But as the number of quarantined people was growing, and right now it's almost twice as many as the number of police officers in the country, there was need to do something about it, and they introduced in a smartphone app home quarantine, which works in the following manner. You, after downloading and installing it on your smartphone, you will be receiving as text messages from the police at random times of the day. And then within 20 minutes of receiving that SMS, you will have to take a selfie and upload it to the server to confirm that you're where you're supposed to be, then it's you, and that you're not moving where you're not supposed to do. There's also some sort of face recognition algorithm behind this, so that the selfie will be compared with the photos of the people that were uploaded for the purpose of issuing personal ID documents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. However, at first this was just for those who wanted to do so, but as of I think it was beginning of April, this became obligatory to everyone in the quarantine. And one of the biggest problems, or maybe challenges with this, is that the source code of the app is not publicly available, because the app was actually bought from a commercial entity which previously developed it as a tool for supermarkets to controlling their product exposition, what's on the shelves, so that the employees could check what's on the shelf, take a photo, and upload it to the system. And because of this functionality, they reused it as a quarantine measure. But because it was bought from a commercial entity, the code is not openly available.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometime a couple of weeks later, another app was suggested. It is not yet ready and it is not yet available, but it's almost ready from what we hear from the news. It's called Protego, and it's one of those Bluetooth contact tracing apps that are so popular at the moment in Europe, and many countries are working on them. So it's again supposed to be voluntary, and it's supposed, using the Bluetooth technology, trace and register all the people with whom you were in contact in the last 14 days. And once someone knows that they're infected, they're supposed to enter that info into the app on their own. And then this will notify the public health authorities, which will then in turn, this is the unclear part. Who will exactly notify the other users of the app? Would it be the app it's all on its own, or the public health authority? I think it hasn't been decided yet. And then you will receive a notification on your screen saying that you were in contact with a risky or potentially infected individual, and therefore you should self-isolate for the next 14 days. However, there's one big advantage of this app. It is it is built from scratch by a community of Polish programmers and developers, only under the guidance of the Ministry of Digitalization. And the code is publicly available on GitHub, so everyone who wants to do so can participate in working on it. And also, mostly because of this, the reception, also in the data protection community, was much better than of the home quarantine app.
And do you think that that it will be possible to explain to the average person that it would be a good idea to install this on the smartphone? Because this is one of the concerns many people have, that if you keep it on a voluntary basis, the market penetration rate will be so low that it is completely useless.
Yeah, I've seen the numbers from Singapore, which is a completely different society and much more abiding the law than here. And there are also problems with this. I think they haven't reached the rate that makes it functional yet. When it comes to the number of people that downloaded their apps. So this will definitely be a challenge, but I cannot imagine this being a obligatory measure on everyone.
So,
I don't think people would accept that.
and there's no relevant political party arguing for this at the moment.
No, I mean, there is a political impulse for this coming from the Ministry of Digitalization, but I don't think there are any major political forces behind this at the moment. This would again probably change in a couple of weeks when it would, when someone will have to start thinking about what we will do after, the peak of the epidemic. How will we get back to normal?
Mm-hmm.
And this might then become one of the central measures.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it looks very much like a showcase of what you are doing on a daily basis when you are working at the department, because we didn't talk about that yet. You are involved in several projects dealing with law enforcement and control and border control using smart technologies, whatever a smart technology would be. Is there anything you learned from your day-to-day situation in Poland at the moment that is important to your academic work, or is it just that you see that everything that you wrote is correct so far?
No, probably not the last one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting experience to live through those very turbulent times, in a way. Because one thing that you learn very quickly, or that I learned very quickly, that in times of emergency, people don't really care that much about what we do on a daily basis. And by us, I mean, me and you and our department. That this is not the topic number one, data protection, when, I don't know, when there is an epidemic.
Mm.
As the same way as it was not the topic number one after 9/11 or any other major emergency. I don't know. I mean, I think it also depends on how such measures are introduced and what's also the way that the government are communicating this to people. Because I think if it's done openly, like this Protego app, used open source code, and everyone can participate who wants to do so, then the acceptance rate will be significantly higher, at least in the community, but this will probably also spread on broader parts of the society. But if we have some ad hoc measures bought from some private entities, this was probably certainly more challenging for the people to accept, I guess.
Yeah, and is there any debate on this other app when this quarantine control app that you mentioned before? Or
I mean, at first there was a lot of debate because it was not really working properly.
okay,
It was interesting because in the Google store the rate was 1.3 or something.
okay,
So that was funny. But they fixed most of the bugs in the first 2 weeks. So now it's working better. I actually asked a friend who is quarantined at the moment, and then he exactly confirmed that at first it was a bit of a nightmare, but now it's working better.
and he's in the situation that several times a day the phone makes
Yeah, I mean,
noise, and then he needs to take a selfie, and no
yeah.
matter, yeah.
So it's also it's important. It says on the website that you cannot mute your phone because you need to hear the phone ringing when the text arrives,
Yeah.
asking you to take the selfie.
Also during the night?
No, during the day. During the day.
And doesn't that lead to a situation where people leave at night then? I mean, if I want to break quarantine, then I go to a party at night then.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I mean, probably, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, there is one thing that I am not certain about, and I don't want to lie to you about it, but I'm not sure how the location tracking functionality works. I mean, it might be that this would also work 24/7, not only during the during the day. And there is, this is another thing, that this is already a law that has been passed very recently, that telecom providers have to provide the location data of quarantined and infected people to the government, non-anonymized data of all that are infected or quarantined, and anonymized location data of everyone else, as measures to combat the COVID-19 effects. And this is again, an interesting thing, because this was passed not as a standalone legislation, but it was buried in 250 pages of anti-COVID package that was supposed to help mostly the economy, but there were, nice things like those hidden somewhere inside.
And did people get aware of this before the law was? No,
because another big issue now is the way that the legislation is passed. So it's rushed very much, and very long drafts, 200-300 pages, are uploaded and also made available to the members of the parliament 2-3 hours before the session of the parliament starts. Because everything is cooked up in the government, and then they just send it at the last possible moment.
Yeah, and that's quite the same here, as you know. I mean, quite the same in Austria, and I think everywhere, at least as far as I know. Yeah.
So there is problem with appropriate scrutiny of what's happening.
And is the opposition still supporting the laws, or are decisions not taken anonymously in the parliament?
Well, because those things are packed in in one piece of legislation, in one draft. I think so far in all cases they voted for those pieces of legislation, because obviously there is also a political calculation that if they vote against, then they're framed in the public media as those that are going against the society. Right?
Which makes it very difficult, probably, to do the communication part for opposing parties at the moment. Yeah.
Of course, I mean, this is definitely an issue now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so then one question that you already touched a little bit is about how the court system is working at the moment, because there have been quite some rumors about changes in the Polish court system in the last years already.
Yeah.
And I would assume that the situation at the moment is not really helping to get things in order again, right? Would you like to comment on this a little bit, perhaps?
Well, I mean, there are maybe two points, one quite a big one and one more of a technical nature. So the technical one is that many proceedings were stopped, and also many, so to say, deadlines have been halted, so they're not running during those times. And the courts are operating at the bare minimum. So, some of the criminal courts or family courts deciding about children's cases are operating, but many of them have closed now. The big argument, the big point here is, I think it was decided yesterday or 2 days ago in Luxembourg, that one thing that was a result of this whole judicial reform introduced a couple of years ago by the government, that is creating a disciplinary chamber in the Supreme Court that was supposed to decide disciplinary cases of judges, prosecutors, and lawyers, has been, I mean, there was a decision from Luxembourg now for this chamber to stop operations immediately, until it will be finally decided by the Luxembourgese court whether or not this whole reform was in breach of EU law or not. So this was, one of those interim measures that was introduced by Luxembourg. So until the case is decided, this disciplinary chamber has to stop operating. And
will they follow?
Well, we'll see, because the president of the Supreme Court, who has not yet been nominated by the ruling party, was obviously in support of the Luxembourg decision, and she issued a letter saying that cases must be given to other chambers, and that the judges in this chamber need to stop, in this disciplinary chamber needs to stop working immediately. But then we also had a deputy minister of justice saying that this is an infringement of the Polish sovereignty, what the Luxembourg court has said, and this judgment should be ignored.
Sorry, is the deputy minister of justice saying this? Yeah.
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 And then we have the Polish Prime Minister who said that it will, like the whole case will be sent to the Polish Constitutional Court, as this is some sort of a legal conflict. I don't know between what and what, but the Constitutional Court, controlled by the ruling party, will then decide whether or not this interim decision of the Court of Justice of the EU should be followed or not.
Wow. So plenty of room for things getting worse even, right, than they are already.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, so the judicial system, I mean, there was a brief moment that was quite optimistic, you know, going back to the technical issues. 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a draft legislation that would allow like completely electronic communication with the courts for parties and for everyone involved. But unfortunately, it was deleted in the last minute. So those who still those courts that still work and those parties that are still in proceedings, they need to file documents by post, which is again, you know, in a way a risk that people need to go to the post office and, you know, wait in a line and send some documents.
So what would then your expectation be on how people, I mean, if I understand it correctly, this is a serious crisis of the whole system, or the whole court system in a way we are talking about, which brings people into the situation that they no longer, or possibly no longer, trust the court system, and then need to find alternative ways to solve their conflicts. So what are the alternatives then? Do people more private arbitration, or do all of them buy guns, or what is the tendency that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think this would be going a bit too far, saying that people have lost their trust in the judicial system. There is a certain political narrative coming from the government, you know, that the judges are some sort of a special group with special rights, and those special rights make them not liable for any of their wrongdoings, and this has to be changed. And this was, you know, framed as the essence of the judicial reform in Poland over the last couple of years. So certainly supporters of this party will probably see the judicial system as at least slightly problematic, but I don't think that this changes the you know, the very fundamental fact that people still go to courts if they have to.
Okay.
But
okay.
This certainly leads to a, you know, a huge degree of legal uncertainty, also when thinking what will be next, you know, when all of this is over. Because if you have judges whose status is challenged, that they're not really judges, and you have chambers of the court that are challenged as not really chambers of the court, and you have a constitutional court that is being challenged as not really being a constitutional court anymore, then there is a significant question what will happen with their judgments.
Yeah.
Because they will, you know, they will obviously not disappear, and they have the clear, like, real life effects on people. And then, you know, in a couple of years, there is obviously a question what to do about this. But this is, you know, going much broader than the coronavirus topics.
Yeah.
It's, you know, part of a much longer debate going on here for a couple of years now.
Yeah. Anthony, thank you. I think we should come slowly to an end. There are no questions asked so far in the chat, but if anybody would have a question, this would be the right moment to ask, or if you have a comment, please do so. Is there anything you want to add, Anthony? Anything that I should have asked that I didn't?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So then thank you for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I really hope that that you personally will be in a safe place and stay healthy for the upcoming weeks, and stay strong. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in Vienna whenever it's possible again.
Me too.
I mean, this is also something we did not talk about now at the moment, but perhaps that is that is something for the last remark,
Mhm.
which is how difficult it has become to travel in Europe. I mean, this is unthinkable,
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
that Poland is suddenly at the end of the world, right?
yeah. I mean, right now I mean, until yesterday, it was still possible theoretically for me to drive by car through Germany and from Germany to Austria. And this would probably be possible if I said that, I'm going for work. But as of today, I think Germany has introduced quarantine for foreigners or everyone crossing the border, 14 days quarantine. So I'm not sure if this is anymore possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
this is,
that's
this travel part is also interesting aspect of those contact tracing apps. That if now every country will introduce their own Bluetooth contact tracing apps, then the freedom of movement will be significantly impaired.
at least
Because
if we really have to learn to live with this for months or weeks, months or years, absolutely, yeah. And it's one of the many reasons why it would be important to have this standardized on a European level, which is not really happening at the moment. Every government is doing what they think that is necessary. Yeah.
Let's see.
So let's see. We still hope. We do hope that you will
come back at some
that you will
point.
come back also physically to Vienna, hopefully in the near future, and healthy and strong. Thank you so much for giving us your input and for taking the time. Thank you for you that you listened to this. I'm also very much looking forward to next week. Next week we are going to have at least 2 editions of this podcast. One of them with Katarina from our department on the US, and one with Shiga from our department on the situation in Slovenia. So stay tuned, please subscribe to this channel and have a good and safe day and a wonderful Easter weekend. All the best to all of you. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.